Auschwitz, the most evil place on earth. 60 years ago today, Soviet troops reached this camp in southern Poland and discovered the site of the greatest mass murder in history. More than 1 million people were killed here, the vast majority of them Jews. Men, women and children from all over Europe were transported here on crowded trains. Many of them were herded straight to the gas chambers, their bodies then incinerated, their ashes scattered in the fields surrounding this camp. Around me, in effect, is the largest graveyard in the world. Today, the world remembers what happened here. In the next half hour, we'll be looking at the history of Auschwitz, how this place in Poland became a byword for evil. We'll be talking to some of the people who survived the camp. We'll meet the British soldier who spent 2 years imprisoned in Auschwitz, and we'll find out how the children of today are learning about the greatest crime in the history of mankind. More people died here than were killed in the British and US armies combined during the whole of the Second World War. It was here that the Nazis' hatred of the Jews became genocide, determined as they were to eradicate the Jewish race from the face of the earth. Penny Marshall, who's with me here in Poland, looks at Auschwitz then and now.
At Auschwitz, the passing of time has not eradicated the horror, nor has the passing of the generations eased the pain. More than 1 million people, mostly Jews, were systematically murdered here, and each one of them is still mourned. This is the place forever haunted by a crime without parallel in history.
The Holocaust stands out. I think there's been no other episode in history where we see a premeditated, pre-planned genocide attempting to wipe out a whole people and aiming with industrial precision at doing that.
Adolf Hitler blamed the Jews for Germany's defeat in the First World War. He set up ghettos in which the Jews were forced to live, travelling separately, their movements controlled. First there was isolation, then persecution, but ultimately mass murder. Many were sent to labour camps, but it was the death camps which saw the fulfilment of the Nazi final solution, camps like Auschwitz. Cattle trucks brought thousands of Jews here every day. On arrival, as they disembarked, the Nazis chose who would live and who would die. Those selected for murder were marched straight to their deaths. They were gassed. Within the camp, there were 4 purpose-built gas chambers and 5 crematoria. It was a death factory. By August 1944, 30,000 people a week were being murdered.
Auschwitz is difficult to understand from a distance, and when you're here, it's no easier. The proof of forethought, the organisation, the sheer scale of this place is chilling. 60 years ago today, this camp was liberated, and so began the process for all of us of trying to understand how it could ever have happened.
When Auschwitz was liberated, the surviving inmates were barely alive. The surviving evidence of what had taken place here was barely believable. These now iconic images of the Holocaust were shot then and have been imprinted on the conscience of generations.
Flugplatz trifft eine Maschine mit ehemaligen hohen Nazi-Funktionären ein.
After the war, the Nazi murderers and their accomplices were sent to Nuremberg for trial.
Böss, der Kommandant des KZ Auschwitz.
The commandant of Auschwitz was among those hanged for their crimes. Today those crimes are being remembered by a world that chooses to do so. They are remembered every day by survivors and descendants who cannot forget them. Auschwitz stands 60 years on as both a memorial for the dead and a warning for the living.
Of course, the number of survivors of Auschwitz dwindles all the time as the years pass. There are only about 150 now left in Britain, but they all have extraordinary stories. I was lucky enough today to meet one of them, Arik Hirsch, to hear his story of surviving Auschwitz. He travelled from his home in Yorkshire and we went to the reception building at the camp. At 14, having already lost his whole family, he had been chosen to work at Auschwitz.
We had to take all our clothes off, and I still had some photographs of my family, my parents, and here I had to undress and leave my clothes here. And they cut our hair off. There were barbers here and completely shaved our heads off, and then they brought us here to the shower, gave us a shower, and we never even had the towels to wipe ourselves or anything like that. And eventually they gave us our striped suit here. Mine was too long, so I used to put my arms up, and also my trousers legs were too long, and put them up because I was quite small. And after the shower, we eventually got our number on the arm. Auschwitz was the only camp that gave a number on the arm. All the other camps never did. You wore a number on your jacket, on the trousers on the side here, but never on the arm. So this was the only one. And here where I got my number.
So that's your number, B?
Yes, B7608.
Yes. How did they put that on you?
They had a wooden pen, like with a point on it, and they made the holes from the number, and then after the number was done, they tattooed it and then put ink on, and they rubbed the ink in, and eventually we washed off the ink, and we left with this number. And you lost your name from the day you got the number, and you were only called by the number. So you're like a sheep. You don't count.
When you think and remember about what you endured here, what they made you do, how you lived, how did you survive?
Here you weren't supposed to survive. They told you so. I mean, we watched transports coming in here every day, train loads of men, women and children were unloaded and been taken straight to gas chambers. And seeing these things on top of it, whatever you had to suffer here every day. Even nighttime you heard the trains, they whistled when they were coming in through the gate at the front to the ramp. And there were 2 doctors and many assessments were standing around, and they were selecting you to the right or to the left. And I always knew never be with children or elderly people, because the Germans didn't need you just to kill you off very quickly. I came here with 185 children from the Lodz ghetto, from the orphanage. I was in an orphanage by that time. All my family was already murdered, not knowing what's happened to them. And I was the only one which got across, and another boy, while there was a commotion behind me. The other boy who followed me across, he eventually died here. So I'm the only one that came out alive from 185 children, which came here from the orphanage. It was, if ever there was a hell, this was it. The inhumanity, the beating, the savagery, the barking from the dogs and the Alsatians, it was horrendous. And they kept telling us, you'll never come out here, the only way you'll come out is through the chimney.
What do you think when you see that wall of pictures?
I think that's the most upsetting thing to see, that normal people, men, women, children, being in parks, playing games in schools, children in schools, and that hits me terrible. It makes a terrible impact when you see these things, to know that all these people have been murdered here for no reason, that only because they were a different religion.
Arek Hirsch. The world knows only too well, or the world should know only too well, about the Jews, Poles, Gypsies, homosexuals and disabled people who died here in Auschwitz. What is not so well known is that several hundred British soldiers were held prisoner close by. Many of them died. The survivors were forced to be witness to mass murder. My colleague Paul Davis has been hearing the extraordinary story of one of the soldiers imprisoned at Auschwitz.
At 85 years of age, Arthur Dodd still enjoys a daily cycle along the lanes around his home near Northwich in Cheshire. Every day is a bonus for a man who never expected to survive the horrors of Auschwitz, where so many of his friends died. They were the forgotten prisoners of the death camps, the British POWs held as forced labourers in Auschwitz. Their story only emerged many years after the war. Among them was a youthful Arthur Dodd, an army driver captured in North Africa. 300 to 400 British prisoners were forced to work in a giant chemical complex alongside the camp. Arthur watched thousands of Jews arrive by train and soon realised what was happening to them.
And all of a sudden we could hear this singing and laughing. And we went out, and coming down the road alongside the camp was children, mothers, and the children were singing, and some of them was waving to us, you know. It was lovely, and it was lovely. You know, I thought, well, I wonder where all they are going. And oh, it was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking. They went straight to the gas chambers and into the crematorium. It was.
Arthur told me he'd witnessed evil beyond comprehension. Jewish children thrown alive onto bonfires. The memory still haunts him.
And the SS were making the mothers and fathers throw their own children into the fire. These are the things that they did. I had little holes in the wall where I used to put bread for them to get.
Among Arthur's proudest possessions today are certificates from the Jewish community, recognising the risks he took smuggling food to Jewish prisoners in Auschwitz and assisting in an ultimately unsuccessful mass escape.
It wasn't easy, was it? Because if you got caught...
if you'd got caught, that'd be your lot.
Many of his friends died at the hands of the SS, but when Auschwitz was liberated and Arthur returned to Cheshire, he found people didn't want to hear the horror story he had to tell.
Didn't believe it. They didn't believe it. They didn't believe that things like that should happen or could happen. So it left me on a limb, you know.
For decades, Arthur didn't talk about his experiences. He says many of his fellow Auschwitz survivors from the British military suffered severe depression and died early because at that time nobody wanted to listen to them. We took Arthur to the National Archive at Kew, and among thousands of wartime documents soon discovered proof that the government of the day had been well aware of the plight of British POWs in Auschwitz. This record bringing back painful memories of the cold-blooded murder of one of Arthur's friends, who'd refused to climb unstable scaffolding without safety equipment.
This German officer, he was a nasty piece of work. He said, if you say you can do it, get up them ladders and do it. He said, I'll do it with I can't do it without the tools. Give me the tools and I'll do the job. And he just pulled his revolver out and shot him. Simple as that.
A grainy photograph captures the British POW's efforts to give their murdered comrade a decent burial inside the camp. Having stayed silent for so long, Arthur now believes it's his duty to those who died of all races to tell his story for as long as he's able to do so.
Paul Davis reporting. Auschwitz, this production line of death, was an enormous place. These blocks are the original camp. Some of them have been turned into a museum. One of the Auschwitz guides showed us a particularly poignant feature: hundreds and hundreds of shoes discarded by some of those who died. Other pitiful possessions can be seen too.
Well, here around us we can see the shoes which belong to the
Jewish people deported to here, to Auschwitz, to Birkenau for mass extermination. Most of them died in the gas chambers immediately after arrival. Shoes and other their belongings were taken to the special warehouses, were sorted, selected, and then distributed, recycled. Nothing was wasted here.
Nothing at all. Even artificial limbs were stockpiled. The suitcases prisoners brought their meagre belongings in, belongings they would never need again.
This is one of the places where I saw the people crying. When they come to here, they can see, they can imagine the pain of the people, the suffering, and the number of this.
In other parts of the camp, the bunks where prisoners lived. Often 1,000 people were crammed into one hut. One of the gas chambers where, as we've said, more than 1 million people died. The ovens where the Nazis disposed of most of their victims. Each year, thousands of people visit this bleak place, a pilgrimage to the scene of man's greatest crime against his own kind. Now today is Holocaust Memorial Day, when the world remembers the Jews who were slaughtered at Auschwitz and other death camps across Poland and Germany. We've heard from some of the survivors already, but what about the soldiers who first discovered the camps? This place was liberated by the Soviet army. British soldiers faced similar horrors at other concentration camps, Belsen for instance. One of the first men there was Colonel Derek Robbins. I met him a few days ago to hear a liberator's story. Retired after a lifetime of military service, the then Major Derek Robbins would never forget what he saw at Belsen.
I remember very well. There were, we were told later, 60,000 Jews in that camp, of which 400 or 500 died every day. And when I got there with my regiment, there were dozens of dead bodies lying about. We got hold of the German guards, who we'd all arrested, as well as the commandants of the two camps, and made them dig the trenches and shovel these bodies in. Great long trenches, maybe 5, 6, 7,000 bodies in each. There were 3 or 4 of those things. And that was us in charge of the Germans. The huts were stinking, and the general said, burn them down. So we took our flamethrowers and burnt all the huts down. I remember that very clearly.
What was the condition of the survivors that you came across?
It was horrible to see. When we saw them, they were still in these awful pajama clothes. They were emaciated, and I don't know how they lived. How did they live, we kept asking ourselves. And we had to be very careful of how we fed them. Because when the Armoured Brigade came in on the 15th of April, they threw them bully beef and biscuits, chocolate. They ate too much. A lot of them died. Yes, it was a grim business.
When you think what had happened, the terrible brutality and the terrible conditions, isn't it amazing that anyone survived at all?
Yes. A lot of young don't understand. They said, Belsen, what's that? Auschwitz, what's that? Oh, we saw something on the television about it. I said, exactly. I said, these were potent days. You should read your history. I don't think our future people will remember much. Sad, but inevitable.
It's important that the young should know what happened?
I think so. I think so.
Colonel Derek Robbins. Now, the recent controversy over Prince Harry and his wearing of a Nazi fancy dress costume has put the teaching of history under the spotlight. Do the younger generation have any idea what happened here and the other Nazi death camps? A survey earlier this month found that the name Auschwitz means nothing to half the British population. Tim Rogers reports now on learning the lessons of the Holocaust.
Down the years and many corridors he has walked, carrying the message with him. John Schillag, now 77 years of age, an Auschwitz survivor, has made it his mission to ensure the younger generation are told and do not forget. Here again, this time in Leeds, more young faces ready to hear his story.
The period I'm describing in my life, I was about the same age what you are now. I was actually 16, coming on 17, still at school.
It is a tale he has told to 10,000 others. Simple in the telling, but with a subject too dreadful for any except those who were there to truly understand. But somewhere in his story, he hopes he will reach these and other children to keep the candle alight.
Quite a number of people died on the journey, others were sick. We had to get off, line up on the platform and pass in front of some SS officers who were directing people. Well, you go this way, you go the other way.
John's family were Hungarian Jews, taken to Auschwitz in 1944. 30 of his relatives were killed in the gas chambers as soon as they arrived.
The chimneys, the smoke, the burning flesh smell and all that. So eventually it sunk in what happened.
John was saved from the gas chamber because he and his father were selected for work duty. His father later died after they were moved to a munitions plant. When he was liberated, John weighed just 4 stone, and this is how he looked in an American Army hospital.
Have you ever really fully recovered from your ordeals?
I think I have. I mean, nobody ever fully recovers. But
in the South Leeds High School, the children have come face to face with history. And John hopes that some of them will consider carefully his underlying message.
I thought it was heart-touching. It brought a tear to my eye just to think that he went through all that and he's lived to tell his story.
I felt really upset for him and just to think what he's gone through.
It helped me to understand what he must have been going through, but it'll never put like what he went through. I'll never understand how hard it was for him.
For John, on this day of remembrance, the memories will be acute.
Well, you will presumably say your own prayer at that time.
Well, I'm not that religious, but yes.
And what would you say?
Let's hope for a better world.
Tim Rogers reporting there on learning the lessons of the Holocaust. And on a day when the world remembers what it would rather forget, that is the end of this special programme from Auschwitz. Goodbye.